for me, it's an interesting conversation because I'm the most passing person in the room, as in like if I lived in like fucking rural Montana, like, and I had, you know what I'm saying, I shave my head like I usually do, like, no, you wouldn't know that I'm black, you know what I'm saying? But because I'm from the Bronx, because I'm like I grew up around black people, other black people that look a lot like me, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's much more believable to somebody from here to be like, oh yeah, you're black, I can see that. But like other people from other places and shit, like I work in White Plains, you know what I'm saying? So like over there, like I'll tell people I'm black and they're like, what? Because like they don't understand the nuance of that. So I think that in and of itself is a privilege for me to just kind of like
White Plains.
Yeah, it's literally called White Plains. Yeah, White Plains, New York. Yeah, and yeah, I think that's definitely like I definitely acknowledge and sit in that privilege where like I am not as black. You know what I'm saying? Like, for lack of a better term, as literally the rest of y'all. You know what I'm saying? So like I could get away with a lot more shit and like, you know what I mean? Like I could pass or whatever. So that's definitely one of those things that should at least be talked about in this whole like privilege combo or whatever.
Do you take advantage of that privilege?
Yeah, all the time.
Do you use it for the dark skin?
I think I definitely do. Like I like to like, I don't know, I feel like because I'm the only black person at my job. And like they don't even, a lot of them don't understand like the nuance or the newer ideas kind of surrounding like race and like ethnic identity and race identity and shit like that. Because me being Dominican, like erasure is a big part of being Dominican. Like we, for some reason, like Dominican people, like speaking for my experiences on the island with my family, like they don't want to have nothing to do with being called black or being acknowledged as black until very recently. So it's a very new idea, it's a very new thing for a lot of Dominicans to accept their own blackness, to the point where like I have cousins who are your skin tone and your skin tone, you know what I mean? And like they will literally tell me like, no, I'm not black, I'm Dominican.
But
like,
they use the N-word.
Yeah, and I'm just like, well, how can you say? I'm just like, but bro, like, how can you say that? Like,
Clear though, but they still say that.
yeah, and they still say that. And we're like, but how can you say? Like, look at you. It makes no sense for me to be like, yo, like I'm black. I know where I come from. Like, I'm not gonna let this toxicity erase me. But so how can you sit there and be darker than me and say that? You know what I'm saying? And your hair lock up tighter than mine. So how can you say that? You know what I mean? So it's just it's a very strange space to occupy, but I do sit in a lot of privilege and I do acknowledge that shit as I
mean, it's kind of strange. You work in White Plains, you're the token black guy and you're the fair skin in your family.
Yeah.
But okay, when you talk to your cousins, do they identify as like, okay, I'm black, or do they like separate themselves from being black and call themselves Afro-Latino or something like that?
Here's the thing, they're so far removed from any of the nuance, like any of the newer aspects of this conversation, like they still think that Dominican is a race. Like, cause you know how people like when they ask you when they would ask like before they would ask like, oh, where are you from or whatever, or like what race are you? They'd be like, oh, I'm like, you see white Puerto Ricans, they are white, you know what I mean? But they'll be like, oh, I'm Puerto Rican, you know what I mean?
I know you a colonizer, bro.
But it's like, oh really? I would have never guessed, because you know what I'm saying? Like you have it's Dominicans, matter of fact. It's a very big Jewish community in DR. You know what I'm saying? And like a lot of them, you would not fucking tell. You know what I mean? You could never tell that they're Dominican, because there's no such thing as like Dominican doesn't look any way, because it's not like it's not a phenotype or whatever.
It's
like it's not.
nationality.
Yeah, it's, you know what I mean? So they, in their heads, they're still like, no, I'm Dominican. You know what I mean? Like, so they still view that as a race, which is a hard conversation to have with them about that.
It's because they have privilege when they say they're Dominican, though, right? If they call themselves black, they don't feel like they have privilege.
Well, that's the thing. They don't acknowledge their blackness.
What you have brought up, it just made me think about how I don't think that's just a thing of like, let's say like, I statements, right? Like being somebody born in America, right? But my family being from Trinidad, you know, people be like, oh, you're black. And I'd be like, no, I'm not black, I'm Trinidadian. So that is exactly what made me think of that. And I don't even know if you're thinking about a privilege, but I think what it is you're trying to, statements. What it is I was trying to separate myself from Black Americanness from what I thought, because this is also me coming from an ignorant, like, distance relationship to my Caribbean roots. You know what I'm saying? My sperm donor he's fucking deadbeat. You know what I mean? So I don't have that same connection. So when people be like, even me, Black, I'm Black, and people be like, oh, you Black? No, I'm Trinidadian. So when people do that, being Dominican and being fair skinned, it's coming from a place of anti-Blackness, just like you said. Like, it's coming from a place of settler and colonialism, like, straight up and down.
Which I think that kind of goes into like why I don't necessarily like the word privilege, because it's actually anti-Blackness a lot of times. A lot of what people get to have access to is because of anti-Blackness, not necessarily that they have a privilege to do something or a privilege to act a certain way, but just that anti-Blackness is set up in a way that it creates levels for people to be able to have certain advantages over others. But it's not necessarily someone privileging them, like, I'm giving you this because of this. It's more, I hate this, but I hate this more. And because I hate this more, it inevitably gives you more, right? So it's like, I hate queer people, Black queer people, more than I hate Black men. So Black men do get to sit at a higher level than Black queer people because the hatred for Black queer people is just more than the hatred for. So I kind of, like I said, I kind of want to start to remove the language of privilege because a lot of times it's used incorrectly, and I'm glad you brought up anti-Blackness. And I also wanted to kind of get into, I guess, shift the conversation, like, not so much around like colorism, like I think that's important, but I do think in this room, part of what we were trying to get to or talk about is the layering, or how, you know, Black heterosexual men, like you said, the myth of like they're the most oppressed in the country, when we see what happens to Black trans women, and we see what happens to Black women, we see what happens to just Black people who aren't cis, hetero, and male. And so I think it's important that we're not calling them out as much as calling them in and starting to like call them into the space. I've always wanted to sit in a space with like Black hetero men and Black non-identifying and Black trans people to see like what would happen. And for the most part, it's like we would all get along. So why can't that be replicated in our communities? And a lot of times it's, you know, what white supremacy has done to us and how we've assimilated into, well, I just don't want to be that oppressed. So if I oppress my own, at least I'm not, like, look, it's almost like I'm trying to not be as oppressed as them, but also show them like, look, you know, I'm not as bad as them, right? And so it's like, we just have like these levels of oppression that start to happen intracommunal, and I'm hoping that this conversation can bring us to a place where Black men start to understand the power that they have, the power that they've always had, right? Like, there's a reason why we know about Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, but we don't know about Marsha P. Johnson, right? Like, they have the power to create change. But I also want them to understand that liberation may not look like leading with them first. And liberation for us may look like leading with the most oppressed first. And for Black men to start to be comfortable being led by people who aren't them, and people who don't look like them, and people who don't identify the same way as them. Because I also think that's a conversation that for far too long we just have not had. And it's like when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement that was started by queer people, to have Black men join, you know, that movement and then still oppress queer people, it's like, y'all don't even know who y'all were being led by to even start this movement, right? So
even before Black Lives Matter.
And I mean, we can talk about the Panthers. I mean, we can talk about Panthers, right? But the problem is, the queer part of that history was erased, right? So it was like they only taught you about certain people if they didn't talk about those people's connection to queerness until years later. So yeah, I just want to make sure that we bring that into the space as well.
Yeah. I like that you said that, because even like privilege, like, so me, I'm like an openly transgender, non-conforming, non-binary individual. So like being Black and all of that is definitely interesting. So just to speak on my journey as like a trans masculine individual who I medically transitioned as far as taking testosterone. So I take T, and that's how I got this. Unfortunately, I haven't actually. And I don't have no type of surgery. So navigating privilege has always been this very interesting thing for me, right? Because I love what you say about privilege because I like to challenge it because privilege is only just as much privilege as other people give me. If I walk into a room, more times than not, when we talk about being assumed or passing, I pass as a gay man, which is a life that I never lived, or like I'm technically not really a gay man, like I'm queer or whatever. So like when I walk into a room and I'm read as a cisgender male that is gay, it is something that like is not within, you know, what I am. So like I still do recognize how, I guess in a way where you're trying not to make it hierarchical, right? It's different for me to walk into a room and being able to be assumed as a cisgender gay man than it is for like a literal trans dude to walk into a room and people are like, you know, giving him shit for, you know, whatever it may be, androgyny or whatever. So when we talk about privilege, it just starts to make me think like as a trans person navigating this world, I only have as much as I get. And it's just so weird because like I'm constantly trying to find myself trying to leverage even the new shit that I got. Like, you know, I came out at 27. 27, I was a grown ass woman, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's pretty well into your adulthood. So I navigated as a little girl, and I navigated as a young woman, and I navigated, you know what I'm saying, as coming into adult womanhood, and then I went into manhood, because that was what I thought, you know, my transition looked like, and I learned that that's not what I'm given. So when we talk about privilege, I like that you're saying, let's try to figure out some other language, because sometimes your privilege could put you at a disadvantage. Like, to cut it short, being somebody who used to navigate as a woman and I went into spaces and even being masculine, you know, I'm hearing, oh, I need to do this for a man, oh, I could give you this type of dick. And then like now I'm left alone for the most part, unless I'm read as a certain way and then I'm receiving a different type of attention than I was receiving before. So like, for me, I just think certain people behind their eyes, like whether it be you, somebody who's black, and people don't, you remind me of my housemate. Like, he's not Dominican, he's black and white, black and Jamaican and white, and y'all look like the same, you know what I'm saying? So it just reminds me of like when you walk into a space, people are gonna see you and they're gonna project onto you all the systems that we got, anti-blackness, homophobia, queerphobia, all that shit, and however they take you, you know what I'm saying, is what it's gonna be. So I like that idea of kind of breaking down privilege so we could really talk about it, because when, like, for you to say I don't have no privilege, it's like I feel you and I understand why you feel that way. Also, let's talk about it, because me and you don't navigate the same, you know?
It's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of different things, right? Because like just entering any space and being male presenting gives you
Assume exactly.
I mean, you're literally gonna make more money.
Benefit of the doubt.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, and then you know you get into the conversation around light skin versus dark skin. How do people view who's gonna be more prone to be violent, and how like all of that. So just like
Fatness.
you said, right? Like fatness and femphobia, and you're feminist, and so it's like all of those things play a role. And it's kind of like a conversation around like what your intersections kind of give you and don't give you.
You know what I think? It's like, I started to think about community, right? Because I'm a community organizer, right? Y'all are too, right? In your respective areas. So I started to think about, when you think about that question, who are my people, right? So then what does it mean to have people? So then what does it mean to be in them space with your people? And if you can't call them in on some shit, you know what I mean? So I think about it as being held accountable to your people and with your people. So like, for me, like I recognize what I have as a masculine being that is sometimes perceived as cis or whatever it may be, that like I move in spaces just completely different. Like one, I've seen my eyes literally through a whole nother set of eyes, so it's jarring to me sometimes. I walk in a room and I say something and they'll listen, I'm like, oh my God, they listen to me. All of this shit. So then I have to like gather myself because I'm not used to that. And then it's like, you know, talking with dudes, like I've had so many conversations with dudes where they don't know I'm just a fat, like my girl's mom, for example, she didn't know I was trans for like the first year. She just thought I was a fat dude, like, you know, with titties, like, you know, whatever. And then when my girl was like telling her, oh yeah, Eli's being misgendered, she was like, misgendered? Like, and it took her for a loop. And then for me, I'm like, damn, I'm like, wow, she really didn't know. Like, because for me, my transition is not about like passing or none of that shit. So then when I get in space with other dudes who they have the ability to speak up in a different way that I do, because even if I am passing or assumed or whatever, I still know who I am and I know what I am, you know what I'm saying? But you know who you are, and you could be in that space and you could say shit that I just, you know what I mean? Like, I can't just say that shit. Your boys will look at you a lot different than they'll look at me, and you have love and relationships with them, and you building that with them, that I won't be able to touch them. Like, I appreciate this because since the beginning of my transition, I've been like, yo, I want to sit down and sit at you, and I want to talk to them. Yeah, and like, it's real and it's happening now. And I was just talking with Pierre about it, where I was just like, yo, for me, it's like manifesting in this way. Like, I said I wanted to do this thing, and now I'm here literally in this room, literally doing this thing with y'all, and it's scary, right? Because now I'm like, what's going to be the outcome? What's next from here?